see all these different stories that we've taken, and we teach our kids these moments in history from God's plan of redeeming man throughout history, and as we're trying to help them learn truths about God at a young age. But what we have to do is, so that our kids can understand the story and understand why we're talking about it, the significance of it, we have to take it and we have to talk about the things that maybe we're not diving as deep into it. We're kind of talking more surface about some things. The danger that you and I can kind of fall into is when we've heard these stories many times, and a lot of those times being kind of through the lenses of VBS goggles, if you will. We're still viewing that way. What we tend to do is miss the point for the mature Christian. You know, Jonah and the great fish, which, by the way, the fish is mentioned in like 2 verses in the whole book. The book is not really about can a man be swallowed by a great fish, even though a lot of people spend time debating whether that could happen. It's actually about whether or not a man will allow himself to be swallowed by the mission of a great God. And it's about God calling a prophet who doesn't want to go because he doesn't like the people and he doesn't think they deserve to be saved. That's kind of got some deeper elements to it, right? It's not just about being swallowed by a fish. And so if we only view it through the VBS lens, we miss the point that really is being made for us as adults. What about David and Goliath? Can you think of any, more adult-themed or adult moments in David and Goliath? I'll give you a hint. It happens at the end. You know, at the end, David walks over, and I know this is a spoiler alert, but it's been around for quite a while. He walks over, and he cuts off Goliath's head. And then what does he do with it? He takes it as a trophy to show the defeat of Goliath. It's kind of a pretty brutal thing, right? And there's a lot to learn from David and Goliath, and there's a lot of great points that can be made for kids, but also for adults. And so today, I really want us to try to learn some things from this maybe we haven't thought of before, or just kind of reinforcing some things we know to be true of this story, but looking at it not through a kid's VBS goggle, but looking at it as adults. So whatever you've heard about David and Goliath for this morning, just for a little bit, let's take that, let's kind of put it in a box, let's put it to the side, and let's try to approach this as if we've not read the story before. And let's see what we can find out. And you know what might happen? We might open up that box and realize, okay, the things that I've known about David and Goliath, they're true. Or not that they're not true that we've heard, but like maybe that's just reinforced. Maybe we think about some things we haven't thought about in some ways. So we're going to start in verse 1. 1 Samuel 17, verse 1. Now the Philistines gathered their armies together to battle, and were gathered at Soko, which belongs to Judah. They encamped between Soko and Azekah in Ephes-Dammim, and Saul and the men of Israel were gathered together, and they encamped in the valley of Elah, and drew up in battle array against the Philistines. The Philistines stood on a mountain on one side, and Israel stood on a mountain on the other side, with a valley between them. So really, just very quickly to set the scene for the rest of what we're going to read this morning, you have Israel on one mountain, you have the Philistines on another mountain, and then in the middle there, between the two mountains, is the valley of Elah. And it kind of sets up as this amphitheater. You got the two hills, and you got the arena, the stage, the battleground below the two hills. And what's interesting is what would happen is each day, when we read about Goliath in a moment, the Philistines are going to send Goliath down. So if they're on this hill over here, they're going to send Goliath down into the valley to look up at Israel on their mountain and shout his challenge. Every day. Are you going to send someone out to fight me or not? Is this going to happen or not? Come on, who's your champion? And so what would happen is, as the Philistines are looking down at their warrior, shouting out these challenges to God's people, the people who claim to be servants of the true and living God, the all-powerful God, the creator of the world, the people who have had these other successes and victories, as they look at their champion, they're then going to glance up at the other mountain and notice Israel, God's people. You know what they hear? Crickets. They're terrified. They look down and see the giant Goliath, and they kind of do this number and look away and like try not to acknowledge. But Goliath is shouting the challenge. The Philistines are watching their champion. They're watching God's people to see their response to their challenge. And what they get is God's people scared and afraid. When you talk about the great warrior David, and he was a great warrior, I want to look at some things that really make him a great warrior this morning through this story. So the scene, Philistines, one mountain, one hill, the Israelites, another hill, the valley in the middle where the battle's going to take place. That's kind of how it's laid out. But one of the things I would say that really makes David a great warrior is talking about Goliath coming down. David wasn't distracted. And that's kind of what happens with Israel. So if you look at verse 4, the champion went out from the camp of the Philistines named Goliath from Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. He had a bronze helmet on his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail, and the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of bronze. And he had bronze armor on his legs and a bronze javelin between his shoulders. That bronze javelin is like a sword between his shoulders. Verse 7, and the staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his iron spearhead weighed 600 shekels. And a shield bearer went before him. Then he stood and he cried out to the armies of Israel, and he said to them, "Why have you come out to line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and you the servants of Saul? Choose a man of yourselves for yourselves, and let him come down to me. If he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall be our servants and serve us." And the Philistines said, "I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together." When Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistines, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. So the Israelites, they look down, and by the way, if you look at verse 33 as well, Saul says this to David. This is Saul's mindset about the whole situation. You're not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for you're a youth, and he a man of war from his youth. Now, when it says youth there, I often remind us he wasn't just a little bitty boy, okay? He wasn't, some 9 or 10-year-old. He was more like a 15, 16-year-old, roughly. He was more of a young man. And the Bible describes him as ruddy and stuff like that. So it wasn't that he was just this massively big and muscular guy, but he also wasn't just a tiny little tot, okay? He was about, that some scholars believe, somewhere between maybe 13 to 16 years old, somewhere in that teenage range. Now, looking at the distraction part, Goliath's description of his height, adding everything up, when you go back to there in verse 4, his height was 6 cubits and a span. Now, the cubits were typically measured from elbow to the top of your middle finger. That's kind of what it's talking about there. And so maybe like 18 inches or so, I think, is about what it would be, if I'm not messing that up. And then that would be the average. Some arms are shorter than others and some are longer than others. But then the span would be if you took your fingers and did this and went from the thumb to the pinky. And so when you add all that up, it was really around 9.5 to 10 feet tall. So the average Israeli man, do you want to take a shot at how tall the average Israeli man was in that time? Just a little over that. 5'3". I knew somebody's going to throw that out, Terry. After the sermon today, we're going to have an invitation song. And if you, oh no, we ain't going out back. If y'all didn't hear, Terry lovingly said, I said the average Israeli man is 5'3", and Terry just let it slip. You fit right in. Well, you ain't wrong. But no, he was, so these guys are around 5.5 foot tall at most, for most of them. Most of them are under 5.5 foot tall. They're looking down at a man who is almost double their height. And that's intimidating. I played basketball my whole life. You see me. That can be intimidating going up against guys that are just 2 foot taller, like a foot to 2 foot taller. And so this guy is big. And that's what they see when they look down. They see a giant, a big guy. But he wasn't just tall, because then he goes on to describe the armor and the weaponry and everything else. Now, he is that 5,000 shekels of bronze, that's around by itself 150 to 160 pounds. And then you start adding up the weaponry on top of the shield and the armor. And the armor isn't just something over him, but it would be layered in a way so that it would keep anything from piercing it. So he's carrying this armor that's extremely heavy. He's got a shield that's extremely heavy. He's got weapons that are extremely heavy. And he's carrying them around like you got a pencil in your pocket. Like he's carrying them around like it's nothing. And so he's massively tall, but being able to do all that, he's stout. He's strong, muscular. And so they're looking down and they're seeing that on top of the height. Massive height, massive strength. So they look down, that's what they see, and they notice nothing else. They forget everything else. Now, at this point in time, have the Israelites seen God ever come through and deliver in any kind of battles? Okay, yes. Many battles. They know what God can do. But their eyes, their mind becomes so focused on what their eyes see directly in front of them that they forget what they know to be true about God. So, let's change that now. Let's look at David. Look at verse 34. They notice a man and forget what they know to be true of God. They're distracted. Verse 34. But David said to Saul, this is right after Saul just said to David, look, man, they've been in battle. He's been a warrior from his youth. And for you, you're just a youth. And so right after Saul says, you don't really stand a chance, then David says, your servant used to keep his father's sheep, talking about himself. And when a lion or a bear came and took a lamb out of the flock, I went out after it, and I struck it and delivered the lamb from its mouth. And when it arose against me, I caught it by its beard and struck and killed it. Your servant has killed both lion and bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, seeing he's defied the armies of the living God. Moreover, David said, the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, he will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. And then Saul said to David, go, and the Lord be with you. Now, this is looking at two extremes, right? One has experienced the deliverance of God, the power of God, the presence of God. They know that they're God's people. But what they see in front of them takes their mind away from what they know about God and His providence and His power. And then David, on the other hand, remembers the lion and the bear. And the fact that the only reason he was able to save the sheep from the lion and the bear is because God gave him the strength to do so. God enabled him to do so. David knew that his strength, his power wasn't his ability to defeat these animals, but God made it possible. And so in David's mind, he sees Goliath, but he knows that Goliath, no matter how tall he is, he does not compare to the power of God. And so his confidence is in God's deliverance and providence and power, not himself. And he does not let the thing that he sees in front of him, this giant who's strong and powerful and a great warrior, he does not let that distract him from what he knows to be true about God. We did a series of lessons, I guess it's probably been like 2 years now. That's wild to think. Did you know 4 years is next month that I've been here? That's wild. I mean, you deserve a pat on the back. And so David, in this moment here, a couple years ago we talked about things that can be distracting. David doesn't let it happen to him, but it happens to us a lot. In Revelation 12:10, the devil is actually described as the accuser. And so we did a series of sermons called, lessons called Voices. And it was looking at different things that can be distracting in our lives, that can pull us away from what we know to be true about God. And so we look at a story like Moses in Exodus, who's struggling with insecurity because he remembers that he killed the Egyptian. And so when God says, I want to use you in Exodus 3, I want to use you to deliver my people out of Egyptian bondage, Moses' first response is, but who am I? And again, that's the thing. It's not just, I can't, I don't have that ability, I'm just little Moses. That's maybe a doubt of himself in that sense, but also in the sense that he knows what he did in the past when he killed the Egyptian. And he's like, God, you don't want to use me, I'm a murderer. That who am I is more about, I'm a murderer and I've got a past, and surely you can use somebody else. And Moses struggles with insecurity. And the devil, that's one of the things he'll use to get us to be distracted, is insecurity. Another one he'll use, though, is fear. Because fear is paralyzing. Now, some of you might be really afraid of snakes. And when you see a snake, you would love to run, but sometimes you can't move. You ever been afraid of something and then when you saw it, you just couldn't move? Not afraid of anything, are you, Terry? No, you're just quick on your feet. You run. Yeah, you run. Yeah, that's right. So sometimes people run, but sometimes we are paralyzed. Fear causes us not to be able to move. And if the devil can get us to concentrate on the things that scare us, if he can get us to take our attention off of Jesus and what we know about God and get us to look at the thing that's in front of us, then he can paralyze us spiritually. And so I think, for example, of Mark 4, 35 through 41, when the apostles of Jesus were in the boat and Jesus goes with them out on the water, and Jesus is worn out, so he goes down in the stern, he goes to sleep, taking a break from all the people that he's been helping, that have been surrounding him, that have followed him everywhere. And as he's out in the boat asleep with the apostles, with these disciples, a storm comes up and it says the boat starts to fill up with water. You remember that? Now, what was their response? Yeah, they go to Jesus and they say, why are you sleeping? Do you not care? Don't you care that we're about to die? Isn't it interesting that they just had the nerve to ask Jesus if he cared? But also, I know we're only in chapter 4 of Mark, but remember, Mark is a rapid pace gospel, right? Gospel account. And so Mark is telling the story of the gospel of Jesus, but he's telling it at this breakneck speed. You think of a kid, an excited child telling a story. His favorite word is the word what? You remember? Starts with I, ends with immediately. Immediately? Not immediately. Starts with a letter I. But immediately, that's his favorite word. And so over and over again, he's like, immediately then this, and then immediately this. And like I often remind us, it's like when your kid or your grandchild comes up and they're like, oh, and then this happened, and then after that, this happened, and then after that, this, and then this. And then it's just this excitement that's going throughout the whole book. in those 16 chapters. Matthew, it takes all the way to chapter 4 to get to the temptation of Jesus, and it's verses 1 through 11 of chapter 4 of Matthew. Mark is chapter 1 is the temptation of Jesus. And not just that, but it's only about 1 or 2 verses. It's not because it's unimportant. He just tells things a lot more concisely, but also that's due to the audience he's writing to. Matthew's writing to Jews. Mark's writing to, remember? Starts with R, ends with omens. Romans. What did Romans really believe in? Power. And that's one of the reasons I think you see such a fast-paced, but you also see all these miracles that are talked about throughout Mark's gospel. So, when you get to Mark 4, there's a point I have with saying all that. Have the disciples that are in the boat with Jesus, have they seen Jesus perform any miracles when you get to Mark 4, verse 35 through 41? Yes. But the storm was loud enough, was chaotic enough, was problematic enough in that the water's filling in the boat, that all they know to be true about Jesus is kind of left in the background. And all they can think about is the actual storm. And as a result, they forget that the one who can actually calm and stop the storm is actually in the boat with them. They're distracted. They allowed the physical in front of them to distract from the truth they know about their Savior Jesus who was with them. How often does that happen to us? We know God's promises. If we've read the Bible, if we've listened to lessons about, we know promises God's made us. I'll never leave you nor forsake you. Be faithful until death. There's a crown of life waiting if you stay faithful. We know these promises that God's made. And here's the thing, God has never broken a promise, and He never will. Everything God has promised has happened. It comes to pass every time He makes a promise. You can, as the phrase goes, take it to the bank. You can trust it. Now, we struggle with those distractions because of the accuser, the devil, throwing all that our way. We allow those things to distract, whether it's fear, whether it's insecurity of ourselves, whether it's shame because of our past, like Peter, when he denied Jesus 3 times and goes off and weeps after doing so. Any of those things can cause us to want to throw in the towel or to give up or to stop. And so you think of fear, it generates a question, 2 words. What if? That's the fearful question. What if? And faith and fear are working in opposite directions. They're pulling you different directions. Fear says, but what if this happens? But what if that happens? Okay, that didn't happen, but then what if that happens? And fear is just this spiraling of what ifs. Faith, on the other hand, changes one of the words. And instead of what if, it becomes, you remember what we said? There we go. Even if. Daniel 3, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego give us an example of that. Nebuchadnezzar is threatening to throw them in the fiery furnace because they didn't bow when the music was played. He's going to give them another chance. This is what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, this is their response, summed up for time's sake. Our God can deliver us from the fiery furnace. He can do it. We have faith He can do it. We know He can do it. We believe He can do it. But then they go on and they finish the thought. He can do it. But if not, we're still not going to bow before you. But if not. In other words, they're saying, even if God chooses not to deliver us through the furnace right now, He will deliver us ultimately. We still trust in Him, not you. Some people don't experience deliverance in this lifetime. We would love that to be the case. But sometimes the deliverance of God experienced is a deliverance that happens eternally speaking. And maybe we don't get to experience here that deliverance. Now, we have been delivered from our sins if we've obeyed the gospel. But I'm talking about when we're going through storms and we're wanting God to deliver us. Sometimes that deliverance comes after this life. But God always still delivers. And their response was just that. He'll either deliver us from this furnace, or if this furnace were to take our life, He'll deliver us later. We trust God, not you. Even if faith and fear need your focus, and they drive your focus, and they'll define the experiences you have, whichever one you allow to dominate your focus. Fear pulls you one way, faith pulls the other. The Israelites were fearful when they saw Goliath, and their fear paralyzed them and left them silent and left crickets being all you could hear up on their mountain. Now, what does that say to the enemies of God as their champion comes down and literally says, I'm defying God's army, I'm defying God's people, and all they do is just sit there and say and do nothing? It increases his strength. And so, and his confidence. So, he did not allow all that to distract him. Another thing that makes David a great warrior is not only was he not distracted by what he saw in front of him, he didn't let that pull his attention away from God, but he did what others wouldn't do. Isn't that one of the things that makes a great leader, a great warrior? Someone who is willing to do what others wouldn't? In fact, you read heroic tales of people, and a lot of those tales, a lot of those stories of these heroic moments come in times when other people are afraid or scared or don't want to do it, but then someone steps up to the plate and does it, and you have this heroic moment. David was willing to do what everyone else wouldn't do. You think of, that's, by the way, verses 13 through 32. We don't have time to read all those this morning. We're about out of time. I think that clock just speeds up every week. But every other Israelite, Saul, all his men in the army, none of them would accept the challenge, but David was willing to. And that reminds me a lot of Jesus. Because in the ministry of Jesus, he constantly did what everyone else didn't do. What everyone else wouldn't do. Whether it's a moment like John 13 with the apostles in that room and they're sitting around the table and nobody washed anyone else's feet. And so Jesus gets up and he does what none of them would do. I would love to have just seen their faces when he started to wash their feet. I'm sure, you talk about jaws dropping, eyes not wanting to look at Jesus, but probably looking at the floor or looking away. Not speaking, partially, I'm sure, because they don't know what to say. They're speechless. Peter's not. Peter says something, right? Lord, you're not washing my feet. And then Jesus kind of throws him for a loop, and he says, well, if you don't let me wash your feet, you have no part with me. And then Peter says, okay, well, wash not just my feet, but all of me. But Jesus, in this powerful moment, he washes the feet of the disciples, which none of them, I'm sure, I don't know if it crossed their mind or not, but I would imagine it was their custom. When you went to someone's house to eat, the host usually would either do it himself or herself, or they would have someone else to do it, but your feet were washed. There was a pitcher of water and a basin by the door and a towel, and your feet would be washed. Why? One of the reasons is when you sit down, it's not like you're sitting now, and it's not at like a normal chair, or normal table and chair, but it's more reclined. You would be more like propped on your side. Your feet would be more kind of in someone else's face, almost, in their direction. So your feet are going to be nasty walking around in sandals, sweating all the time. I know this is nasty, but that's just how they were. Your feet are sweating, you're kicking up all the dust and dirt as you're walking. That's going to cake onto your feet. So you go to someone's house and you're about to eat, you don't want that at the table. Right? So their custom, you wash the feet. I'm sure maybe it didn't go through their mind, which would be even more evident of the fact, I wonder if they had been with Jesus and done all these things and they almost viewed that as something that was just beneath them. They didn't think about it. And then Jesus gets up and he does it. That's a powerful moment. And you read other times when Jesus, how many times did he give attention to the people everyone else isolated and rejected and ignored? Jesus he ate with the sinners and the tax collectors. He constantly did what everyone else wouldn't. David here, he did what everyone else would not do. He fought Goliath. He was willing to do so. And the next thing, and this is kind of where we're going to end. Ultimately, though, yes, he wasn't distracted, and yes, he did what others wouldn't do, but really what made David a great warrior is he knew where his strength came from. Now, we just read it a moment ago in verses 34 through 38, when he talks about the lion and the bear and how he was able to kill those animals because God gave him the strength to do that. What is interesting is when you think about his ability as a warrior, he wasn't able to kill Goliath because he was the greatest slingshot user that's ever lived. It wasn't that he could throw a stone harder and faster than anyone that's ever lived. It wasn't that his accuracy and his precision was unknown to anyone else. He was the greatest marksman with a stone and a slingshot you've ever met in your life. It wasn't that he was so agile and so quick, Goliath couldn't even see him. He was all over the place, so he couldn't hit him. It wasn't those things. What made David a great warrior is he knew where his strength really came from. That's the point behind Judges 6 in the story of Gideon, isn't it? So the people would understand and realize why they won the battle. You start off with these thousands of people, 32,000, and God says, that's too many. Tell them if they want to go home, they can go home. You remember how many people left of 32,000? By the way, that's another VBS story. But how many left of 32,000? You remember? 22,000. He's left with 10,000 men. And God says, still too many. So what does he have them do? Drink water. And those that put their face in the water and drank the water, those are the ones he's going to send home. Those that bent down and would cup up the water in their hand and kind of drink it from their hand that way, those are the ones he kept. Part of that is strategy. It is about battle, because if you put your face in the water when you're thirsty, you have no idea what's going on here. But if you were to take your hand and put it in the water and pull it up and drink it, you can see everything else going on. And so in that, how many men were left? 300. And the whole point, and God says it throughout, he has it written throughout Judges 6. The whole point was so they would know you didn't win because you're the strongest. You didn't win because you have the best fighters. You didn't win because you're the smartest and the best at strategy and planning out attacks. And no, you only won because of me. He wanted to make sure there was no doubt, there could be no doubt why they won. You know, Philippians 4:13, I love that verse. I've loved it for a long time. It was one of my favorites growing up. And then my favorite basketball player, that was a verse he put on his shoes all the time. It's one of the reasons why he ended up signing with Under Armour and not Nike. They didn't want him to write that on his shoes, but he said, I'm going to write on my shoes. It's Steph Curry, and it was Philippians 4:13. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. But for so many, I wonder if we really missed the point of the verse. Because for a lot of us, we kind of read the verse, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. I can do it. I can do it. Yes, you can, but not because of the I. The emphasis should always be, and it should always be emphatically placed where Jesus is. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. The only reason is because of Jesus. That's it. It's not my own ability. It's not my talents. It's Jesus. And David knew that, and we have to know that in our lives. You know, you look at all these things, and they're things that we have to kind of apply for us. And realize that we can't let distractions happen. You see, here's the reality. At the end of the day, we talk about the two hills. And I would say, metaphorically speaking, those two hills are still there. They're probably still there literally. I don't know. But metaphorically speaking, for now, for us sitting in here, it applies in this way. You have the enemies of God on a hill. And every day they're going to send down their champion. And that champion looks a lot different all the time. But that champion is going to lob attacks at our homes, at our families, at our souls, every day. They're going to send down their champion. And they're going to taunt God's people. And they're going to look up at the other hill where God's people are. And you know what they hear too often? Crickets. Same thing that the Philistines heard when the Israelites were silent. And maybe the reason they hear crickets is this group is talking about how upset they are about this, but there's not really any action being done to battle the enemy of, or the champion of the enemy. There's not really thought being put into the solution, just the problem we have with the champion that's been thrown our way, with the giant that's been thrown out there to fight us. The world is watching to see, what will the church do about this? And so it's up to you and me to not allow distractions to happen. Don't look at the size of the enemy. Don't look at the loudness of the enemy. Don't look at what you might see physically, but remember what you know to be true about God, about Jesus. Don't get distracted. Not just that, but be willing to do what others won't. Part of the problem is we have so many people waiting around for somebody else to do the thing that just needs to be done. And when everybody expects someone else to do it, then no one does it. And so instead of just expecting others to do it, VBS was encouraging for me this year because I saw a lot of people step up and want to help. And some of them just recently have placed membership or started coming. Some of them have been coming for a while and maybe haven't helped in that way before. And I know for some of them, some of the things they were doing was out of their comfort zone and was probably a little more difficult than it might be for someone else where it comes natural. But they did it. Because even with those that it might come natural to, some of them didn't volunteer to do anything. And that's no specific knock on any person. But it's being willing to step up and help and do whatever needs to be done. Whether that's in the work of the church, like when we're putting on an event here, whether that's out there in the world as we go and try to reach into our community and seeing needs that need to be met, things that need to be done, and being willing to step up and say, okay, if no one else is going to do it, I'm going to do it. Don't get distracted. Be willing to do what others won't do. And all in all, as all that comes together, remember where your strength comes from. It's not your own ability, but it's God's. And that's why at the end of the day, we can do whatever we put our mind to because we're not doing it of our own strength. We're doing it with God's help. I love David and Goliath. And there's a lot to unpack. And we're out of time. Brother Terry. Yeah. It's real big.
You're almost talking about walking under a basketball goal and you're just missing that top by 3 inches.
I know. It's a, and not just that, but again, truthfully looking at it's not just his size, but it's also the reality that the men of Israel were short. They weren't, average speaking wise, they weren't real tall. And so if you take 5'3" and you go 9.5, that's 6 inches difference, or 6, wow. Look, it's been a long few weeks. That's 6 foot difference. 6 foot, 6.5 foot difference. But thank y'all for being here this morning. I appreciate y'all Should be a lot of visitors here today. I know some are in class this morning. Members here at Central, make sure to meet somebody new today you've not met before. Oh, and don't forget, handouts for the sermon are in both lobbies.